Hey, how's it going, everyone? Figured I'd start lecture just a minute early today so we could say hello, introduce everybody. I could welcome everybody into the classroom. How y'all doing today? Welcome to the first day of Psych 241 lectures. We've got 32 lectures this semester. 30 lectures, only 15 weeks. So 30 lectures coming up. So this is the first of 30 lectures. Good afternoon, Jungen. It's very good to see you. Leanne, Bree, good to see you. Etta, Lacey, fantastic. I am so glad to see everybody here this morning. Looks like we've got 4 users so far. Hopefully we'll spin up to a few more. I was thinking I'd have at least 15 or 20 today, so I'm a little bit disappointed, but that's okay. Maybe we'll get some more people coming in. Ooh, you're in Asheville. How long are you in Asheville for, Etta? I was there this weekend. It was fabulous. I absolutely love Asheville. In fact, if I could get a job in Asheville, I would move there. That's how much I like that place. Fantastic. Good to see everybody. 12:59. I will try to type for 5 people. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And Leanne, thank you very much for dropping in this morning to my intro psych class to say hello. It's always kind of nice to have people visiting. My students can sort of see that we have former students that like the class, so it's always good advertisement for me. Cool. Oh, I know. What are you doing there? You just up for the week visiting, Etta? Oh, you lucky dog. It was not snowing this weekend. It was not snowing this weekend. I went to Early Girl for breakfast, Early Girl Eatery. Check that out if you can, Etta. It's a really good restaurant. I love it. I love it. Anybody else in here? We're going to have a surprise guest in here. Oh, my God, not Jack. Please, man, tell me it's not Jack coming back. I have post-traumatic stress. No, I shouldn't make a joke about that. But I have nightmares about Jack coming back into class. Let's hope not. Okay. Not him, I promise. Okay, fantastic. As long as it's not him, that's all I ask. All right, let's see. It's 1:01, so it's time to get started. Let's go ahead and switch to the PowerPoint presentation. Hope everybody can see the PowerPoint well enough. You can hear me well enough, right? So we've got everything going on and we're ready to go. Cool. I'm going to go ahead and get started. Someone from previous class. I hope so. Well, when they come in, go ahead and type in the chat bar so I'll know who it is. Wow, look at that. We got 13 people in here now. I don't feel so bad, Etta. Welcome, welcome, welcome to everybody who's in class now. It's good to see you folks. Welcome to the first of 30 lectures. Remember, these lectures will be recorded. If you can't make it at Monday or Wednesday at 1 p.m., the same link that you used to visit the live class will also turn immediately into a recording. So you're welcome to come back and watch this recording as many times as you want. Gosh, I don't know how many times you want to, but you are welcome to watch it at any time you want and as many times as you want. Crystal Bishop in the class. Hi, Crystal. How are you doing? It was a pleasure meeting you this weekend. Thank you for joining me on social media. That was surprising. That was a nice gift. I really appreciated it. I didn't expect to see you on social media, but it was very good to see you. And I like your posts. You're very funny, Crystal. Very funny girl. Okay, so we're talking about Chapter 1 today. After completing this chapter, actually for today's lecture, we're going to talk about the lifespan perspective and why it's important. So basically that's going to be why you should be taking this class. We're going to talk about the organizing principles of development, that is age and domain. I'm going to talk about the 8 principles of the lifespan perspective. We're going to talk about different ways of conceptualizing age. And then we're going to talk about the 3 developmental issues that are important to the study of human development. Sit back and relax. We're going to take about 45 to 50 minutes for this lecture. And if something comes up and you have to bump out, you're more than welcome to come back in and catch up where you left off in the lecture. Okay, let's see. I'm glad you're a stalker. I'm going to stalk you too, Crystal, all right? So we'll both be stalking each other on Facebook all semester long. And I saw that you like cats too. You had some cool posts this weekend. So let's go ahead and talk about human development. Human development is the pattern of change that occurs beginning at conception and continuing until death. A lot of times when people think about developmental psychology, they think about that period studying 2-year-olds to 10-year-olds. You know what? We're going to extend it in both directions. Really, your development as a human being starts when you are conceived in your mom's belly, and it goes all the way until you end this life. You are never, never, never done until you die. So human development occurs over the course of the lifespan. The neat thing about developmental psychology is it encompasses all of the other brands of psychology. So if you remember last semester we talked about biopsychology. Well, there's the human development of the biological dimension. Remember when we talked about cognitive psychology in Psych 150? Well, you know what? Your cognitive abilities develop and change over the lifespan. So the neat thing about human development is it encompasses all the other areas of psychology, and it talks about how these areas change as we move from conception to death, okay? Human development does include growth as well as decline. So a lot of people think about human development as getting better, as abilities flourishing and abilities emerging. But you know what? Unfortunately, and I hate to say this now that I'm 51 and I'm moving on the backside of the human development cycle, it also does include the decline of abilities. So if any of you have a parent or a grandparent around that you talk to, a lot of times they may say, oh my goodness, my joints and my bones don't feel as good as they used to. I'm not as flexible as I used to be. My mind doesn't work as well as I used to. And so decline is also a normal part of the human developmental process. So it's a pattern of change from conception to death, and it includes growth, maintenance, and the decline of our abilities. All right? Now, the lifespan perspective. When we talk about the lifespan perspective, we're going to be talking about biological change. But you know, development is not just influenced by your biology. It also includes your social environment and your culture. Those kinds of things affect your development as well, and also your individual personality kinds of characteristics. So over the course of the semester, Karita, I've gotten to know you, Leanne and Etta, I got to know you over the course of the semester, and I have a pretty good idea what your individual personalities are like. And personality does affect your development as well. If you have a positive personality, your aging and the negative effects brought on by aging will take longer to occur than if you have a negative mindset. So human development is sort of this big pile of change that occurs from conception to death that includes the gaining of abilities and the losing abilities, and it's affected by your biology, your culture, and your individual personalities. All right? Is that clear? Did I get everything? Okay. In my early 30s, I think I'm declining early. You're funny, Crystal. You are way too young to be changing for the negative just yet. I'm laughing at you as I read your comments, Crystal. Very, very funny. Karita, oh my goodness, Karita, you showed up in the 11 o'clock class, didn't you? I am so sorry. I thought I'd known you before. I'm sorry you missed my 11 o'clock. You came to the 11 o'clock. From now on, you just come to the 1 o'clocks, okay, Karita? All right, so why is developmental psychology important? Because it helps. Because it helps. Think of this class as a user's manual for your body. How to live your longest and best life. That's what you're going to see. And I'm sorry you were crying, Leanne. Doggone it. Try not to do that if you can. Why is it important? Because it helps you live your longest and best life. You know, the upper boundary of human life is 122 years, we think. That's about the longest that the biological material will just hold together. That, if you will, is your possible lifespan. Current lifespan now is 79 years. 50% of your cohorts will live to be 79 years of age. Now, in the prehistoric era, the average life expectancy probably was about 18. Did you know in the year 1900, the average lifespan was 47 years? 47 years. I'm already 51. That means I'd have a 50% chance of already being dead, right? So do you know why the life expectancy has moved from 47 years to 79 years in just a little over a century? It's because we know how best to help human beings live healthier, happier lives. Absolutely. Medical care is better. Also, and we know what the body needs. Developmental psychology has helped us improve medical care by understanding what it is that kills us. If you understand why people die, then you can create interventions that help keep them from dying. Very good point, Ed. A very good point. Thank you. Until the government gave us COVID. Yeah, right. I know that's going to impact. You know what? That's a very good point, Crystal Bishop. And on Wednesday in class, we're going to be talking about cohort effects and the emergence of this huge pandemic virus is going to affect developmental trajectories. That's a great point, Crystal. And in fact, that's what Wednesday's lecture is going to be about. So I'm really glad you brought that up. Okay? Okay. Hold on, I'm getting a message here. Stephanie Pleasance. Is Stephanie in class right now? She said that this class is supposed to start in 106 days. So I'm just sending her a quick text that we're starting now. Okay. You know what? How does a developmental perspective shape public life discussions and policy? Examples. Developmental psychologists help us in terms of health and well-being. For example, we now know that there is a positive connection between exercise and cognitive development. Specifically, if you engage in that cardio, Karita, I'm so proud of you for being in the gym yesterday. Folks, I actually ran into Karita down at the gym yesterday, and she was getting her cardio on, sweating and looking good. You know what? That's a good thing, Karita, because if you do that and keep that cardio going, it's going to help you keep your mind a little bit longer. We all experience cognitive decline in our later years, but we now know that if you exercise and keep yourself in good health, you will delay that natural cognitive decline that is going to happen. There you go. You CrossFit now. It's never too late to start, Crystal. You must be a bad, if you know what I mean. If you're doing that CrossFit stuff, that's tough. Throwing the tires and doing all that heavy stuff. Good for you, Crystal. I'm proud of that. Also, there you go. That's a good thing to do, all of you. And I'm going to keep hitting you with that all semester long. You're going to say, geez, Chris, leave me alone about the exercise. But I'm going to keep telling you all semester long, get your exercise. Get your exercise. Get your exercise. Oh, crap. I may be running out of power on my laptop computer here. Crud, crud, crud. And let me see. My computer may die, so I'm going to go ahead and plug it up here, if you don't mind. Hold on, I'm going to duck real quick. And I'm going to plug my laptop in. Okay, absolutely. So it also affects us with policy issues. For example, deaths of despair. I don't know if you've ever heard of deaths of despair, but they usually use that to refer to people who overdose on drugs or commit suicide, right? And what you'll find is that when things like so with regard to the COVID virus, there's a question of whether or not we should close down society and make people stay at home or let them go out and live their lives normally. You know what? It is safer on one hand to keep people locked up in their homes, but on the other hand, deaths of despair may increase. People who are lonely and sad may be more likely to overdose on drugs or kill themselves. So the developmental perspective helps us talk about certain policy issues. What should we do? Should we let those kids go back to school, or should we keep them home for safety, right? The developmental perspective has also let us learn about about the relationship between ethnicity, socioeconomic status, and gender on lifespan and health incomes. Did you know that males tend to have a shorter lifespan than do females? Minorities tend to have a shorter lifespan than do non-minorities. And all of these allow us to understand that there are things we need to address in society, right? Because if certain groups don't live as long as other groups, then we may ask the question, what do we need to do to help these different cultures, ethnicities have healthy, happy lifespans, right? And then parenting and education. You know, it seems like every generation has a different philosophy on how we should raise our younger generation. And we now know that there are things you should do as a parent in order to make sure your children grow up healthy and happy. So the developmental perspective has really allowed us to have lots of different discussions, and these discussions are all what lead us to raising children who live happier, healthier, and more importantly, longer lives. Okay? So, that's sort of the value. So basically what I'm trying to tell you is, why is it important to be in this developmental psychology class? Because we have learned how to expand the length of and improve the quality of our life. Ah, there you go. Etta, bringing in the Polish perspective. You know what, Etta? I absolutely love sauerkraut. My wife hates it, so I have to eat it on my own. But there's nothing like some good old pickled cabbage, right? Okay. Organizing principles. Now, here's the deal. Human beings don't develop unidimensionally. All right. If you've ever been in a class before, remember when you were in grade school, there may have been a kid who was the tallest kid in class. Or do you remember the kid who went through puberty first? I remember the first of my friends that started getting facial hair, and all of us sixth grade boys were so jealous when Jack started growing his little cheesy mustache and his beard, right? So some people mature earlier on a physical domain. I don't know if you remember in grade school. There you go. Exactly, Leanne. Some females may have developed their secondary sex characteristics earlier and some later. And then you know what? You folks probably remember the kid that was the most grown up in fifth grade, or the kid that was unusually immature, right? And so we develop along a socio-emotional dimension too, a personality dimension. Some people's personalities don't mature as early as others. And then there's a cognitive domain. That's the ability at which our intellectual domain along which our intellectual abilities develop. And the weird thing is, each and every one of us is developing along these three dimensions at a different rate. So for example, I was pretty clever intellectually, and I would say my cognitive development far outstripped all of my buddies in school. But you know what? I was always the shortest guy with the latest puberty compared to my other buddies. So my biological development was a little bit slower. And then, you know, I might have been a little immature too. So, you know what? Actually, I was young in school, so maybe I wasn't immature for my age. But right? But we develop along these three different dimensions, if you will. Okay? Now, here's the deal. This is how this book is going to be organized. In order to study human beings, what you have to do is you have to break them down. If anytime you want to study anything, you have to break it down into bite-sized pieces. You can't just try to study the whole elephant. We instead need to study parts of the elephant. And developmental psychology does that. So it studies us based upon our three dimensions: biological, cognitive, and socio-emotional development. But then more importantly, it breaks us down into different age groups. And you'll notice right here below me, I have the different periods of development, from the prenatal period to the infancy period, which is from birth to 2 years, early childhood, which is from about 2 years until you start school in kindergarten at 5 years, middle and late childhood, which is pretty much elementary school, right? Adolescence is pretty much middle school to the time you become legal for your first drink at 21. Early adulthood is in your 20s and 30s. Middle adulthood, which is where I'm at right now, is your 40s and 50s. And then late adulthood is from your 60s to 70s. Now, it wasn't always apparent that we should break people up into periods of development. In fact, you'll see the statement I have down here early, G. Stanley Hall in 1904. He was the first guy to come upon the inspiration that maybe there was a period between childhood and adulthood. He called it adolescence. Before him, pretty much they thought at 12 years of age, you're an adult, man. You're no longer a child. You are now an adult. But we now understand that there's this weird period we call adolescence, when you're getting pimples on your face, you're getting all this hair growing on you, and your emotions are all over the place. You know what I'm talking about? And now, I would say even more recently, we know that there's a period sort of between adolescence and adulthood we'll call emerging adulthood. And those of you who are 20, 21, and 22 going through school trying to figure out who you are as a human being, and Crystal, you're probably going to laugh and tell me you're still trying to figure out who you are, because you seem like you've got that kind of sense of humor. We call that period emerging adulthood. I know I'm not a kid, but I don't feel really grown up yet. I'm sort of in that period where I'm trying to figure out who I am. She's 10, but she acts like a 4-year-old. There you go. And your niece is 8 and acts like a 40-year-old. Exactly, Etta. And the weird thing is, the one who's really immature may be tall and maybe already going through, probably not puberty at 10, but she may be even going through puberty at 10. So she may be early on that dimension, but late in terms of her socio-emotional development. I'm 18 and I feel like a 5-year-old. You know what? I'm 51 and I still feel like a 16-year-old kid in my mind. Sometimes I even act that immature. But whatever. You never grow up, you never grow old, right? Now, here's the deal. This is important. These three dimensions that I have with the circles and these 3 age periods are really important. And in fact, this book is going to be developed that way. So, in section 2, we're going to talk about prenatal development. So, next week in chapter 2, we're going to talk about genetics, and in chapter 3, pregnancy. So, that's the prenatal period, okay? In section 3, we're going to talk about biological development in chapter 4, cognitive development in chapter 5, and socio-development in chapter 6, all related to infancy. In section 4, that is chapter 7 and 8, we're going to cover early childhood. So I'm going to talk about physical cognitive development in chapter 7 and socio-development in chapter 8. And then we're going to go right back and do physical, cognitive, and socio-emotional development, but we're going to talk about middle and late childhood. And do you folks see how we're going to organize this semester? So we're going to keep, thank you, Amal. So we're going to keep repeating it back. And so what we're going to do is for every age group, infancy, we're going to go over these 3 circles. And then we're going to repeat these 3 circles for early childhood. Then we're going to repeat these 3 circles for middle childhood. Then for adolescence. Does that make sense? And so that's sort of a plan for how this course is going to be organized. And why do we organize it based on age groups and by dimension? Because there are similarities of those different age groups that makes it useful to study them. So if you think about your intellectual ability, Etta, and the intellectual ability of that 10-year-old kid, you're not in the same place. So it doesn't make sense to talk about you two in the same breath, right? So we focus on Etta, the 25-year-old adult. That's what I'm calling you. I'm not sure what your age is, Etta. And then we'll focus on that 10-year-old. But we're not going to talk about you. The same scientist isn't going to be focused on both of you. Okay? And then the course ends symbolically with death. Yeah, right? Definitely, Ashley. We're going to be ending symbolically with death. And, boy, I've got stuff to talk about when we get to that part of this semester too, because I have come face to face with the meaning of death this semester too. Right? Holy cow. But you're right, it's always a downer way to end the class by talking about dying. And I'm going to encourage you to have a good death, to die well. Right? We all have to do it, but let's die well if we can. Very funny point. All right, so now here's the deal. At first I told you we're going to break age up into these different age groups, and we're going to talk about age in terms of biological or chronological age. And chronological age is the number of years that have elapsed since birth, right? But you know what? We can also talk about age in different ways. And maybe it's not quite as obvious, but if you think about it, we can talk about age in ways other than just the number of days you've been alive on this planet. So we can talk about age in terms of biological health. You know, have you ever met somebody that looks really old at 40 and some people that looks really young at 51? I mean, look at me, folks. Do I really look like an old man yet? Do I look 51, or could I maybe pass for 41 or 42, right? Have you folks ever met one of those people, and I don't know if any of you have gone back to a high school reunion, but when you go back to your high school reunion at 20 years, you're going, oh, God bless you, Leanne. Leanne, you're looking for an A in this class. I'm telling you, keep saying that. Keep saying that, all right? You're freaking hilarious. Absolutely love you, my dear. Okay, so you can think of that in terms of your biological health. And really, some people, you can think of health as how close you actually are to the grave, really. And so your biological health is another way to look at it. My mom at 67, because she smoked all of her life and was really sick, she looked really old at 67. Whereas you'll meet some 67-year-olds and they'll look like the picture of health. So age can also be how you are biologically, if you will. You'll be 20. You know what? You probably hate that right now, Madison, that everybody thinks you're so young. But when you get 40 and you look like a 28-year-old, you're going to love the fact that you look super duper young. I know exactly what you're feeling. I got carded for beer until I was 30 years old. And you know what? Now I don't mind looking so young. But when I was 20 and 21, it was embarrassing. You know what? I taught my first college class at UNC Chapel Hill at the age of 24. And I swear to God, I looked like the youngest kid in that class. I was so intimidated teaching all these people that looked older than me. So you can think about biological age. You know what? Drugs do really play a number on people. You do have a good point, Stephanie. You do have a good point. Watch me age over the course of this semester. I'm going to be doing that chemo and that radiation. I'm probably going to age 10 years in the next 4 months. I'm kind of bummed out about it because I like being that young, cute professor. But, oh well, life is what it is, huh? And then you can think about psychological age, too. People's adaptive capabilities in terms of their personality. And you can talk about whether or not you're living as a young person. I don't know if you've ever met somebody who just seems like they just seem kind of bummed out about everything and they don't want to engage with life, and they just seem like they're older in terms of their personality than other people too, right? And so psychological age is another way. And you can, every one of my coworkers, right, absolutely. Sometimes people are super duper immature and you're like, dude, you do not look like a 30-year-old. You're actually still focused on, you still look like a 16-year-old. You're a mix of maturity. You know what, Leanne, I like to think of you as mostly a mix of fun and laughter, right? So let's not call it immature. I just think you're fun and playful, and that's what I like about you. And then, you know what, we can also think about social age, which is your connectedness with others and the social roles that people adopt. Some people adopt a parenting role over their younger siblings at age 13 or 14 because their parents are either absent or because other situations make it necessary for them to grow up and be the parent, if you will. Some people disengage from life. I know my brother, my older brother, one of my older brothers is like 58, and he doesn't have he doesn't have a significant other right now, and I keep saying, Timmy, man, you need to find yourself a female. And he's like, oh, I'm too old for any new relationships. I'm like, dude, you're 50, you know? But he, in a sense, has kind of developed this old man social age where he's pretty much given up on new social relationships. So you can think about age in terms of how you connect with others as well. Oh, come on, Leanne, you know you are. So let's just remember that age is just a number. You can think about it in terms of chronological age, that is a number, but it's also how you are physically, how you are mentally in your intellectual abilities, and it's how you relate to other people. All of these considerations are going to be important. And you know what? The younger you feel psychologically, the more engaged you are with other people, and the healthier you are, the slower your aging process is going to occur. And you will be much younger than your number would suggest. Does that make sense? My brother's 44 and still single. Yeah, I guess it is. I wouldn't know. I've been paired off for 31 years, so I can't even imagine what life was like before I was single. But I see what you're saying, especially with social media and having, I mean, it's probably really difficult to pair up. I'm 37 and dating is brutal, but it's rough out there, especially when you don't. I saw that, and I'm proud of you, Crystal. Good for you. I saw your social media post. There's nothing wrong with some light drinking, but if you can avoid that and drink water and eat your vegetables, you'll probably wind up being healthier overall too. You won't die alone, Lane. You won't die alone, I promise. You just got to be willing to take a chance and make that connection, right? And you know what? I think social media sometimes gives us the belief that we can always find better out there. Back in my day, it was hard to meet another person. So when you met somebody, you took them for their good and their bad. I think a lot of people, because social media makes it so easy to find a new dating partner, people are too willing to give up on a relationship when they hit the slightest bump. You know what I mean? Even though I would say I'm in a good marriage, holy cow, there are some tough days when I don't like Mrs. Roddenberry and when Mrs. Roddenberry really doesn't like me too, right? That's okay, Leanne. With your kind of personality, you are going to find yourself another guy because you are friendly, super duper friendly. And same with you in Poland, not really, really. That's interesting. You know what? Maybe we can talk about that on Wednesday when we're talking about cohorts effects. And I'd be interested in hearing about the difference between dating here and in Poland. It probably does make cheating so much easier too. Yeah, that's a relationship killer for sure. Okay, so let's see. Now, before we go on, I want to talk one more thing about age is just a number. Your book in chapter 1 is also going to talk about the 4 ages. There's some people who focus on the 4 ages. And these people, these are mostly the adult developmental psychologists. And what they do is because people are living so long now, it's not as easy to talk about older adulthood starting at 60 because really sometimes you'll hear people say 50 is the new 30 or 60 is the new 40. Because we know so much about developmental psychology and because people's health behaviors can make them live such long, vibrant lives, it's important to distinguish between what we would call the 3rd age and the 4th age. And you know what? A lot of the physical and cognitive declines that come with getting older can be pushed off until plus 80 if you want, right? So we used to think that everybody started losing their mental abilities and physical capabilities around 60 because that was being an old person. But you know what? If you follow my advice and engage in good health behaviors, you can push all those aging effects off until your 80s and maybe even your 90s. So one way of thinking about age is breaking us up into these the 4 ages. First age is childhood and adolescence, which is where you're learning, right? Prime adulthood is your 2nd age from 20 to 59, where you're maintaining and creating your life. And then the 3rd and 4th age are where you can either decline or not decline based upon your health behaviors. Okay? All right. So, do we have any questions so far? Have I confused anybody with what I'm talking about? Oh Lord. Hey, Feed's my husband and I gave him the silent treatment for 2 weeks. Oh, Yeah, I give my wife the silent treatment sometimes. I'm kind of the emotional, angry one in my relationship. My wife is a rock solid. She's imperturbable. She doesn't get angry or super duper happy. She's just on an even keel. Meanwhile, I'm all the way up and down, right? Okay. Funny, Crystal. Well, I hope they can keep your cats alive. Okay. So let's see. Oh, and the fine thing, age is just a number. Here's the deal. It turns out that although your genetics do play a role to some degree in your lifespan, you know what really depends, what determines your final lifespan is your health behaviors. Putting those cigarettes down, putting away all that fatty food, not drinking too much, exercising, eating your vegetables and fruit. And so when we talk about people's aging, we can talk about how they move from life to death. And we can talk about normal aging, pathological aging, and successful aging. So normal aging describes most of us. So we peak in our 30s and 40s, and then as we move into our 60s and 70s, our physical and cognitive abilities begin to decline, and we become the 81-year-old person like my father who has trouble moving around, and my pops at 81, his mind isn't as sharp as it used to be, and he forgets things. And my dad at 81 needs help. He's what I would call normal aging. On the other hand, there are people whose aging process moves more quickly. So, for example, my mom smoked 3 packs of cigarettes a day from the time she was 18 until she died at 67. And my mom at 50 looked like a 60-year-old. And at 60, my mom looked like a 70-year-old. And by the time my mom was 65, she was having trouble moving around, and her personality had gone down, and she was starting to disengage from the world. My mom is an example of what you would call pathological aging. Me having cancer at 51 is an example of pathological aging. Now, I hope to beat it, but if it was to kill me at 60, you would describe my aging as being pathological. On the other hand, if you look right underneath me, this is my wife's grandmother. She's actually 100 years old. This is her picture from a year ago. She's actually about 2 months from being 101. She's an example of successful aging. Not only is this woman smart, her mind is super duper sharp. She actually has rental properties that she still manages on her own. She manages her own finances. She lives alone by herself. Nobody has to take care of her. She actually drove her car to her 100th birthday party. This woman seems like she's never going to die. She is an example of what I would call successful aging. We should all hope to be as healthy and as vibrant as my Nana is. She is remarkable. And so you can think of age as it's just a number, and think of aging as sort of this trajectory towards death. And what we want to do is we want to avoid the things that lead us towards pathological aging, and we want to strive to be successful agers, to keep our mind and our physical abilities going until late in the lifetime. She is an amazing person, super duper smart, man. She's quite clever. Actually, I talked to her last night. She's having some physical troubles. She didn't have physical troubles until she started, till she was 100. And then she's developed some stomach problems. And she was so depressed last night because she feels sick. And she actually said, man, I just sometimes wish I was dead. And we really tried to push her up because she's sort of depressed because she's now having these physical illnesses that are bringing her down. And so, yes, if you perceive yourself as old, you do become old faster. You are quite right. It's all in that mindset at a good point. All right, now, your book in chapter 1 is going to talk about a researcher named Paul Baltes and the lifespan approach. And the lifespan approach is just 8 beliefs that you need to incorporate into your thinking as a developmental psychologist. According to the lifespan perspective, development is lifelong. As I said, it starts when you are conceived and it lasts until you're dead. You are not done changing at 31 I think, did you say you were 40, Crystal? I don't want to insult you if you're not 40, but you said you're 40. You're not done at 40, Crystal. My brother is not done at 57, though he thinks he is. And I am 37. Oh my God. Slap my face, Crystal. I'm going to punish myself after class ends for saying that. You're not done at 37, even though you think you might be, Crystal. I'm not done at 51. And you know what? My grandma at 101 is not even done. Development is lifelong. As I suggested to you, it's multidimensional. It involves changes in biology, our cognitive abilities, and our socio-emotional abilities. It's multidimensional. And it's multi-directional. It includes gains as well as losses. Plasticity, good question. Your development, even though your development has a genetic set, a genetic trajectory, you can change it based upon your environment. So, your environment can really be used to change your developmental trajectory. For example, some children are born with autism. But what we know as developmental psychologists is that if you see a child young enough and discover that they have autism young enough, you can really change their trajectory and their outcomes by early intervention. Plasticity is the degree to which your developmental trajectory can be changed by environmental circumstances. Does that make sense? Some people are born missing parts of their brain, and yet they still manage to turn out normally because their brains have neuroplasticity. If you're missing the part of your brain where language is supposed to be processed, another part of your brain will take over that ability, and you will still learn how to speak normally. That's what we mean by plasticity. Now, it is also multidisciplinary. I'm going to be talking to you about people who are psychologists and what they have to say about developmental psychology, but we're also going to talk about medical doctors and what they have to say about about the developmental process. We're also going to talk about what sociologists say about the development process. We're also going to talk about what anthropologists have to say about the developmental process. We don't just have psychologists studying the lifespan approach, but everybody gets involved with it, from medical doctors to anthropologists to psychologists to sociologists. So there are multidisciplinary processes. Now, as I suggested earlier, development is impacted by biological processes, cultural processes, and also your personality. There you go. Thank you very much, Madison. You provide a very good demonstration of plasticity. And if you're willing to share with us later on in the semester, we'd love to hear your point of view about the therapy and what you've experienced and what you feel and think. I would absolutely love for you to share with us. And you know what? Anybody else who has, I'm going to be sharing my experiences with cancer this semester. Not because I want you to feel sad for me, but just because that's a different perspective that maybe will help you understand this developmental perspective better. Madison, you may share your autism, your experiences with autism with us. Not because you want us to feel sorry for you, but just because you want to help us understand a different side of life that maybe we don't see. That is very impressive. And remember, I suggested to you that development involves growth, maintenance, and more importantly, the regulation of loss. And I'm going to try to suggest to you how you can avoid losing your intellectual abilities as you move on later into life. Good. Oh, we'd love to have it, Madison. We would absolutely love to have it. And like I said, it's contextual. We're going to talk about cohort effects. We're going to talk about culture. We're actually going to talk this Wednesday about how the COVID virus may affect your development as young adults in life. And I'm going to talk about how my experiences growing up during the AIDS pandemic of the early 80s that affected my life as well. So we're going to talk about how these context effects affect our development. Okay? Types of contextual influences. Normative age-graded influences. Context does affect our development. Normative age-graded influences are influences that happen at what we would call predictable times. So all of us went to school around the age of 6. That's a normative. Going to school at 6 is a normative age-graded influence. It affects all of us when we first go to school. We all graduate around 17 or 18 from high school. That's another normative age-graded influence. When we all graduate at 18, our life changes and our developmental trajectory changes. These are what we would call normative age-graded influences. Most of us, well, back in my day, most of us got married in our early to mid-20s. That might also be considered a normative age-graded influence. And those contexts affect our development. On the other hand, there are non-normative life events that also affect our development. By non-normative life events, we mean those events that happen, but they happen at the wrong time. For example, losing a parent when you're 4 or 5. You're not really supposed to lose a parent or a sibling when you're a young child. We typically think of that as an atypical life event. Or having cancer in childhood. We all know that lots of people develop cancer, but I had a friend of mine who developed leukemia as a middle schooler and wound up dying before he graduated from high school. That would be called a non-normative life event. Okay? So, there's and these events are non-normative. Crystal, are you asking me? Would how I was able to get to the environments I was raised in and live be considered plasticity? You know what? I think that would be more grit. That would be more grit and your positive mindset, Crystal. I think that's what that would be. Good question. Very good question. Okay, and then on Wednesday we're going to talk about cohort effects, and these are specific events that infect an entire group of people at a particular time. My grandma, my wife's grandma, grew up in the Great Depression. She lost, her daddy died when she was 13 years old because he got sick and they hadn't invented penicillin, which would have saved his life. He died about 4 years before penicillin was invented. And the doctor told her when she grew up later, he's like, you know what, honey? If I'd had penicillin, your daddy wouldn't have died. That's a cohort effect that occurred to her based on her history. And there were a lot of people like her who probably had that experience. She is a very frugal person that saves her money and doesn't spend any money. That occurs because she grew up in the Great Depression when people were poor, poor, poor. She lost her older brother to World War II when she was an 18-year-old. So Nana is really tough in her mind, and she's willing to deal with negative events because of the difficulties imposed upon her in the Great Depression. We could talk about the Civil Rights Movement as being a cohort effect. And on Wednesday night, I'm going to ask you to tell me how you think COVID is going to affect our generation. Or there are lots of researchers that talk about how the invention of the smartphone has affected our development. Crystal, you mentioned how it's tough dating in the social media world because it makes it a lot easier to cheat on people. That's what we would call a cohort effect. Back in the 80s and in 94 when I got married, if you wanted to cheat, you had to go out and find somebody in your neighborhood or at work to cheat with. You couldn't just get on your phone and go to Ashley Madison or Tinder where you sweep right or sweep left. It was more difficult to violate the rules of a relationship back in the day, and that made it easier for us to have relationships and maintain relationships. What you're talking about now, Crystal, with the difficulties of dating these days, that is what we would call a cohort effect. And that's going to affect your development and make you different than me because I'm 15 years older than you. So do you folks understand these contextual influences that we're talking about, normative, graded, non-normative, and cohort effects? Okay, finally, and I am so sorry I'm running on, but we are just about done. Now, developmental psychologists argue three things. To what extent is our development affected by our genes, which would be nature, and to what effect is our development affected by our nurture, which are environmental experiences. So we're going to talk about nature and nurture all semester. And in fact, next week, chapter 2, I'm going to spend the whole time talking about genes and genetics, which is the nature side of the explanation. And then when we get to older adulthood and aging, I'm going to talk about how important environmental experiences are to slowing down the developmental process. So we're going to talk, so developmental psychologists are always talking about whether or not development is created by nature or nurture. Stability or change. We're going to talk about the degree, how quickly our abilities change or whether or not they stay the same. So actually, I didn't talk about this, but you see the chart right below me? There are researchers who have studied how our intellectual abilities change as we get older. It turns out our crystallized knowledge, our knowledge for facts, does not decline as we get older. Instead, our fluid intelligence, the speed with which we can think, and the creativity with which we think changes. So, when we ask the question of stability and change in intellectual abilities in older adulthood, your knowledge for facts is not going to change. What will change is the speed and creativity of your thinking. So developmental psychologists are interested in this stability versus change question. And then we're going to talk about continuity versus discontinuity. So is the process of aging changing like a butterfly? You know how a butterfly starts out as a caterpillar and then changes to a pupa and then changes to a butterfly. And it looks completely different at each stage. That's what we would call discontinuous change. Or some things like an oak tree, and a little baby oak tree looks like a big oak tree. That's what we would call continuous change. When human beings change, do we evolve into different creatures as we get older? Or are we just adding more and faster abilities? Does that make sense? Okay, you know what? That's the end of the first half of chapter 1. On Wednesday, I'm going to be talking about the second half of chapter 1, which is the research methods that we use in developmental psychology. I am sorry for keeping you 50 minutes. I guess that's about normal, is a 3 days a week lecture. I'm going to try to finish in 45 minutes, but I may run over to 50 or 51 minutes occasionally. Remember, we're going to have our Wednesday webinar. You can either do the discussion board, or really we'll have more fun if you come on Wednesday to my team's meeting. And in the team's meeting on Wednesday, it's going to be a focus on you talking, not me, but I'm going to let you talk on Wednesday because I'm doing all the talking now. If you folks have any questions, feel free to send me a text, or I'm going to hang out for a couple of minutes and monitor the chat bar. But I'm pretty much done with my lecture. So I just want to say thank you for coming today. I had a great time, and I hope you learned something a little bit today. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to send me a text. Otherwise, I will see you on Wednesday. Bye-bye.